Hello, everybody. Hello. Welcome. If folks are able to turn your cameras on, we would love to see your faces. If you can't, we understand as well. My name is Andrew Engel. I want to welcome you all to our pre-Mother's Day holiday gathering, Leaning into Joy, Holding Space for Grief. I lead virtual public programs at Reimagine. I live in New York City, also known as Lenape-Hoking, which is the land of the Lenni Lenape peoples, past, present, and future. During the colonial era and the federal period, these folks were removed by the US, but also some remained among the continuing historical tribal communities in this region. I acknowledge the indigenous territory where I am to remind myself that many more steps are needed to undo generations of damage caused by colonialism and white supremacy. Please let us know where you are zooming in from. We want to get that chat going. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a white cisgender male. For those of you who don't have a visual of me, I've got an orange background in the back, and I've got a spotted black shirt with little blue dots on it. I want to tell you a little bit about Reimagine. We are a nonprofit organization catalyzing a uniquely powerful community. People of different backgrounds, ages, races, and faiths, people of no faith, all coming together to heal ourselves, our communities, and the world. We support each other in facing adversity, loss, and mortality to transform life's biggest challenges into meaningful action and growth. Reimagine resources, support groups, events like this one today are free and accessible to the public. This is made possible by the support and generosity of participants like you. So for those of you who have already made a tax-deductible donation when you registered for today's program, thank you. Your gift will immediately support Reimagine's mission to help people of all walks of life transform those hard parts into purpose and action. Before we begin, just a few Zoom tips. For those who wish, you can click on the CC icon at the bottom of your screen on your laptop to get a live transcript of what's being said. And you can save the chat by using the three dots within the chat window. If you have any technical issues during this event, please feel free to send a message to me or to my colleague, Lily Liu, who is assisting on this call. Thank you, Lily. Everyone on this call right now and everyone who has registered for this event will get a playback recording in the follow-up email. Just to give you a broad overview of what the format is for tonight, I'm going to be introducing our special guests. There will be around 45 minutes of discussion. We'll follow that with 20 minutes of Q&A. For the Q&A, I just want to note that it would be great when you start listening to our wonderful speakers, if the questions start percolating, feel free to put those in the chat, and I will be pulling from the chat and fielding some questions to our speakers. Before we begin, I want to dedicate tonight's program to Lisa May, Cora Eileen, Gabrielle Eileen, Eric, and Nick. There are full bios of all of our speakers in the event description. Lily will paste that in the chat. She'll also be pasting some links to our wonderful speakers so you can learn more about them. But I want to first give a special shout out to Marisa Renee Lee, who really was the instigator for this event. She and her buddies here on this call were already developing this program. And she reached out to Reimagine about it. And at that moment, honestly, I was struggling to come up with a Mother's Day program because we do holiday programming at Reimagine. It was just kismet. So thank you, Marisa. As you know, holidays like this one can be quite charged. Every year we host gatherings on Mother's Day, Father's Day. We've got events for Thanksgiving, the December holidays. So it's really important at these times to get together and to connect with others who may be struggling. Um, I also now want to just share a bit about our guests. Marisa Renee Lee is a called upon expert in coping with grief. In 2008, she lost her mother to cancer. This loss transformed her life and led her to question what grief really is and what healing truly requires. She is now a rabble-rouser of social healing. She's a former appointee in the Obama White House. She's managing director of My Brother's Keeper Alliance. She's co-founder of the digital platform Supportal and founder of the Pink Agenda. And she's a regular contributor to all these wonderful magazines, including Elle, Vogue, MSNBC, and other media outlets. And she is a mother to her son, Bennett, and to her dog, Sadie. Michelle Hord is a media consultant, executive coach, author, and speaker. Her award-winning memoir, The Other Side of Yet, was published in 2022. We have, she is the founder of the nonprofit Gabrielle's Wings that serves a global community of elementary age children through educational, recreational, and cultural engagement. You can tell that by her background. There we go. Stephanie Fu is a writer and New York Times bestselling author of What My Bones Know, a memoir of healing from complex trauma. She has worked as a radio producer for This American Life and Snap Judgment. And Lisa Keefauver is a grief activist, speaker, and author. She began her career as a social worker and a narrative therapist. Lisa's grief advocacy inspired her to found Reimagining Grief, with a mission to illuminate and dismantle the limited and misleading collective story of grief that causes so much unnecessary suffering. Out of her podcast, Grief is a Sneaky Bitch, she wrote her first book, Grief is a Sneaky Bitch, an uncensored guide to navigating loss. And Pub Day is June 4th. Congratulations, Lisa. It's now my pleasure to hand this over to our facilitator, Amanda Kloots, another new friend of Reimagine. Amanda Kloots is a television host, best-selling author, actress, and an award-winning fitness entrepreneur. And she's mom to her son, Elvis. You may know Amanda as co-host of The Talk on CBS. In 2021, she released her memoir, Live Your Life, My Story of Loving and Losing Nick Cordero. And now, off to you, Amanda.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for everyone that's here and joining us. This group of women that are on this panel tonight are pretty amazing. I feel like there is not a grief question that we probably couldn't tackle between all of us. So as we're talking to all of the people that are here listening and watching this Zoom, please write in some questions. Give us your goods because we want to help. I've found that in sharing my grief, it only has helped me to heal. So please bring on your questions because it hopefully will help you, but also helps us. It's an honor to be here. It truly is. And I'll hand it off to Marisa. First, just to say a couple words, the wonderful, beautiful Marisa Renee Lee. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Amanda. First of all, I am currently recovering from COVID. So if I sound a little weird, that's why. You will see me drinking lots of water throughout our time together. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Reimagine, for hosting, and Amanda and Stephanie and Michelle and Lisa for agreeing to join me this evening. I wanted to host this event because I, honest to God, spent my first Mother's Day without my mom in a bar in Soho. I remember waking up in an apartment on Mulberry Street that I shared with two wonderful roommates who were both off at home somewhere else in the tri-state area with their moms. And they had, of course, included me, invited me to join them. I declined. You know, the idea of being around other wonderful moms when mine had been gone for only a few months at that point was just, it was just too much to bear. And so I remember sitting in our apartment and thinking, where can I go where I won't be overwhelmed by all of this like big mom Mother's Day energy, because I just can't take it right now. And I realized if I just went and sat at a bar and had some French fries and some rosé, I would probably be okay. And that's what I did for my first Mother's Day. And not to say that there's anything wrong with that, because there isn't. I was 25. It was the best thing I could have done for myself at the time. But I want to create space for more than sitting alone in a bar drinking rosé. I want to create opportunities for people to connect and learn from one another about how to deal with the really messy, hard, complicated parts of grief, and ultimately how to create space for continuing your relationship with the loved one you've lost and leaning into joy of some kind, whatever that might look like for you. For us this weekend, joy is actually going to be rooted in productivity, as we will be potty training our toddler. So again, no judgment here. There is no right or perfect or wrong way to do any of this. But I hope that this evening, when we wrap up, you'll walk away feeling a deeper sense of community, feeling less alone, feeling less shame or judgment connected to your grief, and identifying ways that you can really live with that loss and experience some joy this weekend. So thank you for being here.
Oh, Steph, that was amazing, Marisa. Gosh, it brought back my first Mother's Day. And I think we can all agree how grief days just sneak up on you. I had no idea that Mother's Day was going to hit me the way it did. It still does. I've been crying all week because Mother's Day is Sunday. It's such a triggering holiday for me, and it came out of nowhere. And we'll talk about that later, because I'm going to tackle Lisa on that question and ask her why she might have the same feelings that I do. But I would love to start off with a question for Stephanie. And I would love to ask you, Stephanie, if you could kind of start us off by talking about your grief of estrangement, and how you were able to manage that, and how you're still managing it, because as we know, grief doesn't just go away or disappear at some point in time. And then also how you've been able to help others, or, what kind of advice you can give to people that are in your same situation.
Yeah, I think one thing, it's a blessing and a curse. It's a curse that I didn't have a mother growing up since I was 13, because that's when she left. And it's a blessing in some ways, because I've had a long time to deal with having motherless Mother's Days. And both of my parents abandoned me by the time I was 16. So I've had a lot of practice with lonely Christmases and New Year's and Thanksgivings. And I think one of the ways that I have always dealt with those things is, I remember my first Easter, I went to a sushi buffet with a Sunday paper, and I read the whole Sunday paper while eating sushi for 5 hours. And I think the best thing you can do is treat yourself and just feel very entitled and be like, you know what, I don't have a mom, and so screw it, I'm gonna do whatever I want. I'm gonna, pamper myself in various ways. And then the other thing is, I always text all of my other motherless friends. I always say like, hey girls, how are you doing? Hope you're all right. And then I stay off social media, because there's nothing worse than seeing pictures of all of your other friends hanging out with their moms and being like, brunch, and I think that the way that I dealt with it is, last year I was very much like, I get brunch now, because I was pregnant with my kid. And so I was just like, I don't know, I maybe it's my incredible dissociation, but I somehow just erased my mother from my memory somehow. And I was like, brunch, 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 brunch. And I forced my husband to take me out to a lot of Malaysian food. And I took over as the mom, I guess.
Yeah.
And it was really, really healing. I felt like it was the first year in which I got to be excited and to actually celebrate it. And, you know, it was the first year too that I saw these posts of people who loved their moms at the age of whatever, 34, and on Instagram. And I was like, oh, one day that could be me. Like one day, hopefully my son will still love me and we could have a relationship. And that kind of blew my mind. Because I don't feel entitled to his love. I maybe it's kind of weird, but I feel like before I became a mom, I had a hard time trusting that he would want to be in my life when he's an adult.
Yeah.
But yeah. So my relationship to social media changed a little bit. So I still commend not being on there at all.
Yeah, that's funny. Social media can be extremely triggering. I think that's what really hit me my first Mother's Day. It was like this jarring sensation of, oh, everyone's husbands are spoiling their wives, and it's just another day over here, kind of thing. But I love what you said about calling other motherless women that I think that we probably can all agree the strength in our community that we now are in is incredible. And it really is a lifeline. It really absolutely is a lifeline. 100%. Does anyone else have anything else to say about, chiming in with Stephanie before I go on to asking Michelle a question?
Just one thing that she said that really resonated with me, and I realized it's something I've said to other people as well, and it was the piece around entitlement. Like if you are in this conversation with us right now this evening, you've had to deal with a lot of really hard stuff. And if you are grieving and a holiday is triggering to you, you should absolutely feel entitled to do whatever is going to make you feel good. Whether it's sushi buffet, rosé at the bar, getting off of social media, whatever it is, like entitle yourself to those things that help, because why not? You deserve it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I would just add that works for Mother's Day, but I would also say that's part of our work as we're grieving is to cultivate knowing what we need and setting those priorities for ourselves, asking for what we need. That helps us throughout the year. So not just starting on Mother's Day, but to cultivate that practice throughout the year, I think is a really important gift for all of us who are grieving. Yeah.
Michelle, I would love to ask you about Mother's Day. I can't imagine losing a child and what that feels like, and then having to celebrate Mother's Day and how you even go about that first Mother's Day. Sometimes the second Mother's Day is worse than the first Mother's Day, as we know. How you tackled that and how you moved forward in that kind of grief.
Yeah, I lost my mother suddenly when she was 50. She's perfectly healthy, had a cerebral aneurysm. I was 24, and 3 months later, her mother died of cancer. So all of a sudden, as a 20-something, my connection to my female lineage, like the chain was broken. And so when my daughter Gabrielle was born in 2009, it was very much like you said, Stephanie, like I get the brunch now, right? Like that it was a way to reimagine holidays and rituals and to create new ones and to take something that had been and still was challenging, but also enjoy as a mother. And unfortunately, my daughter was murdered when she was 7 years old. It'll be 7 years next month. And the smartest thing anyone said to me or has said to me about it is there are no words, right? I'm sure one of the questions that many of you get are, what do I say to someone? All of a sudden you become a grief expert and it's like, nope, this just sucks, but okay, I'll be an expert for you right now. But I agree with Rose, with Sushi. I will tell you that because I grew up as a TV producer, I like forecast in advance. And so it's like, okay,
Yeah.
Halloween sucks, Christmas sucks, Mother's Day. And I try to find things, whether it's volunteering, whether it's like staying in my room with Ben and Jerry's, but really kind of think about those days in advance that can be triggering. And as Lisa can tell you as an expert, any day can be triggering, right? But things that I know will be triggering, I try to think about what possibly could feel comfortable and helpful in this moment.
Yeah.
I love, Michelle, what you said about volunteering. I found that extremely helpful this Thanksgiving. We volunteered at the talk and I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a wonderful way to start this holiday because it takes you out of yourself. You
Yes.
forget about yourself, you forget about your problems, and you put yourself into somebody else's shoes and you just give of yourself. And when you do that, it really lifts that weight off of yourself of that pain and that suffering and woe is me. And especially when you start your morning off with it, I ended up having an amazing Thanksgiving because that's how I started your day. And that was a surprise to me this year. That's, 4 years into grief. So that's a great little tidbit to share, guys. If you're listening.
That's been oxygen for me, to be honest. That has been
Yeah.
oxygen for me.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Michelle, you're amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Elisa, I'm going to ask you as a widower, as a fellow widower, how you find joy on Mother's Day and how was that journey for you?
Yeah, thank you. I know the club that nobody ever wants to be a part of, the Widows Club or the Motherless Club. Thank you, everybody. First of all, Michelle and Stephanie and Marisa for sharing a little bit. I think when you are an only parent, which is different than being a single parent, you become a mother and a father and all the parents. And to your point, my daughter was 7 when my husband passed, and obviously she wasn't like writing the cards herself and cooking the breakfast or doing the things. And so it was challenging for years to navigate those holidays. And also because it's not a 7-year-old's job to make a mother feel good. This is a Hallmark holiday that she has no responsibility for, not to mention we have very different styles, as personality. So I think, I'm not going to lie, it was definitely brutal. Like everybody has shared in their own version. Everybody else's husbands were busy making breakfast and doing the activities, and they all tried to invite me over, and I just really didn't want to be around that, So I think I've learned over the years, my daughter's 20 now. I was saying to all of you off air before we got on, I'm telling you, they're 7 and then they're 20. I don't know what happens. But one of the things I have been learning, just to add on to what each of you were saying, is I always check in on my friends who've experienced a mother loss on Mother's Day in particular. And I think even one of my friends is on this call. Those are my friends who've lost children, who've experienced stillbirth, who's experienced infertility. I really try to spend my time building community before the holiday and during the holiday. Again, that's that outward. So instead of we're inward gazing, that's kind of in a way like volunteering. I think that brings me comfort and support and gets me out of my own head. And I just wanted to add on to what all of you were saying, so much wisdom. Have a plan. Yes, grief is sneaky and it can show up any day, but we know it's going to probably show up on these days. Volunteering is, we know this from science, neurophysiologically good for us. So like do that. I would add, again, having an exit buddy. So I always say, like, I think of like crush, do you have your exit buddy on any holiday? If you know it's going to be a hard holiday, do you have that one friend that you can say, I'm going to an event because I have to go, or I'm not going to an event. Can I have you on speed dial, or can we set up a time? And I've been fortunate enough to have some exit buddies along the way. I still use them. My husband, it'll be 13 years this summer, and I've lost other people since then. And I'm always thinking about my exit buddies whenever I'm approaching a holiday like Mother's Day or any holiday. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. I just personally, just because I share your widower grief, you know, it's hard, guys. I'm still not finding the joy in Mother's Day yet.
Yeah.
It's just, it hasn't happened for me yet. I kind of, you know, I think too, it's like all your friends will reach out and say Happy Mother's Day to you because that's what you do. And I think a lot of people think that Father's Day is harder for me than Mother's Day, but it's not. It's not, because
Mm,
on Father's Day, it would be me spoiling Nick or something, you know, like I would be treating him, it would be doing my job. But because Mother's Day is all about, you know, going to the spa or going to brunch, or, you know, the gifts that your kids give you, you know, that your husband went and bought. So it is like, it is beyond hard for me. It is just
Yeah.
a really tough day. I am not there yet. And for the first time, because you guys are all saying this, I have a plan for the day. Because now I know after 3, I learned like I need to have a plan. And so I have a plan, and, you know, I'm just hoping and praying that it works out to be even 2% better than the years before. Cause I always feel like if you can do something that even helps 1%, at least you're 1% better. But it's a tough day. It is a tough day for me because that family unit is gone.
Yeah.
And
Amanda, can I reflect back to you just because we shared this and you asked the question about joy? I first want to name for you, because I can imagine other folks on the call feel this way. If you don't feel joy, that's okay.
yeah.
I think there's so much pressure. And even though this conversation is about leaning into joy, and Marissa and Michelle and I know have talked over the years about the ways in which we do that, and I'm sure Stephanie has that practice, I just want to name that we have this culture of toxic positivity. And while I want us to offer some ways in which we all find little joys, by the way, or micro joys, as our friend Cindy Spiegel calls them, there isn't a pressure. And I think I like to substitute the word ease. Like maybe your goal is
Mm,
ease. One of the other tricks we can use is shift our expectations. So maybe it's ease, or maybe it's comfort. Or as you said, I gave a talk once called, you know, why knowing more about grief can make it suck less. Like maybe our goal is it to suck less.
yeah.
Not that I want us to give up on joy, because I think we can find joy in other ways, but it's okay to redefine joy with these other words and make them feel more accessible. Just wanted to offer that. Yeah.
yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Can each of you guys just give like maybe like one beautiful thing you might be doing on Mother's Day to honor your, you know, the person that you lost, and that you know, just to inspire that, you know, that joy or that sucking less moment of the day.
So I'll share mine. And actually, Mother's Day is still hard. Like I'll cry at some point in the next couple of days. Not sure when, but like it's coming. I can feel it building. And so because I know that I usually don't feel that great on the actual day, what I started doing maybe 5, 7 years ago was sending cards to other mothers who have played some role in mothering me. I've been without my mom for over 16 years now, and I've been very, very fortunate, including some of the women on this call, to be surrounded by women who have just really invested in me and in my family. And I want to honor them. And I view honoring them as also honoring my mom. She was also a woman who would make her own cards with like stuff from the craft store. So it's become a really big thing for me. And so that's one of the things that I've chosen to do, to sort of give back and also continue that connection with my mom.
I love that. Someone else, Stephanie, what are you gonna do on Mother's Day for it to suck less?
Oh, you're on mute.
Well, a couple years ago, we lost my mother-in-law, who she was a really wonderful, wonderful woman. And she was one of the reasons why I like married my husband and wanted to have kids with him in the first place, because I was like, well, I don't really know how to mother. So she'll be there and she'll be able to make sure that I don't mess up or be abusive or whatever. But unfortunately, we did lose her in 2021. And I think we like to share memories about her, and we light a candle in the window on special days like that and on Halloween, and with some chocolate, because she's really obsessed with chocolate. And yeah, she'll be with us.
Love that. Michelle, what about you?
Yeah, I'm this year having a fundraiser for my foundation and Gabrielle's memory, Gabrielle's Wings, on that Saturday for mothers and mother surrogates. Because to your point, Marissa, there are so many women, whether it's they, were not able to have children, or have mothered other people, who should be honored as well. I think this day, to me, more than any other Hallmark holiday or any holiday, has a stereotype to what it's supposed to be. And people grieve for a whole host of reasons. Their mother could still be alive and yet be a mother who was abusive or who was not what they saw, on whatever sitcom they were watching. So I think there are so many, there's this ideal person, right? And the first thing to me is to get the ideal out of your head. We're all human. And I don't know. I just think that's important, because I don't think I have found, having lost my mother, her mother, and my daughter, that people are sort of like, oh, paper covers rock. And I have a crazy sense of humor. But loss is loss. There's no loss Olympics.
Yeah.
And there's no, varying degrees. There's certainly some types of losses and some ways of losing someone that people would perhaps have consensus around being perhaps more difficult. And, don't ever let anyone take your feelings, what you need, away from you. I think that's really important. So I've now gone around the block to get across the street, Amanda. I apologize. But I'm going to spend some time at this park in back of me. That's not really in back of me, but Gabrielle's Playground, which is one of our projects that we did. We're having a fundraiser this weekend. And then I'm going to go get a massage Sunday. And I'm going to actually spend that day and evening by myself. And one of the things I've learned is, as someone who lost a child that at the hands of her father, I do not have the privilege of sharing that grief and those memories with anyone else. So for me, sometimes being alone isn't isolating, it's affirming. So again, there's no playbook. And maybe next year I'll feel different. A few years ago I may have felt different, but you have to just sort of go with your gut and what feels right for right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, Lisa, what are your plans?
Well, I mean, thank you, Michelle, for sharing that. I'm glad you went around the block and back again. I think it was beautiful. One of the things you mentioned that I think about all the time, for me, especially when we think about these holidays and look at this panel, we all have different relationships to loss on Mother's Day, is that idea of comparing or rank ordering grief. And sometimes other people do it to us. Well, mine is worse and yours isn't. And sometimes we do it to ourselves. And I call that being a grief thief. So I always invite people around the holidays to look out for the grief thief. And sometimes that grief thief is in the mirror. So if you have a lot of friends who've experienced other kinds of profound losses, and you're saying, I don't get to be sad on Mother's Day because, and like for me, my mother is still alive and I have a stepmother still alive, and I could very easily grief thief myself into saying that I don't get to feel how I feel. And so I've really learned to be present to that. This Mother's Day, I am actually flying home to my hometown, and I'm going to see some family and some friends, and I'm going to celebrate that. I'll be away from my daughter who lives here. So we're having a dinner before. But this year, she and I have been talking a lot about honoring her birth mother, because my daughter is adopted. So that's one of the things that we're really doing, especially as she becomes an adult, is just talking more about honoring both her loss, my daughter's loss of her birth mother, but also her birth mother's loss experience. So that's kind of that's what I wanted to offer up about this day. Yeah.
I love that. I think that obviously this goes without saying, but sometimes you know how you forget things or you don't realize things. But lately I've been very much into remembering Nick and saying his name like out loud, because as time passes on, if
Yeah.
we don't keep saying their names, they go away.
Yeah.
And it is so important. And I think it's really hard to talk about the people we've lost, and it's really hard to talk about grief. But the more I can talk about Nick Cordero, it's
Yeah.
another day that his name is said aloud. And I think it's so important to say our people's names aloud and be proud to say it and not be scared to say it, but stand in that power and talk about them like they're still here. Because I know Nick is beside me all the time. I talk to him and he responds all the time. It's
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah.
But it's also really comforting. And I think we have to remember to do that. For me personally, guys, I like to, on days that are hard, wake up and get out of the house. It's something I realized very, very early on in my grief journey. Sundays were always a hard day for me because it's like typically family day. And I just realized if I stay in my house, it is a dark, dark day. So I wake up, I get out. I'm like, come on, Elvis, we're going. I don't even know where we're going, but we're going. And we
Yeah.
stay out all day. And for some reason, that really helps me. So
Yeah.
I love all of everyone's little tidbits. So I hope that you guys listening and watching can take one of those and maybe, or two of them, and help yourselves, you know, through Mother's Day, whatever day, a normal day that's hard. I
Amanda,
want,
can I just jump in really quick? I'm so sorry. I just want to kind of underline saying the names and also giving other people permission. You know, I found my daughter would have been 14, and I have friends whose kids are now in the 9th grade, and she made it to the 2nd grade. But every once in a while, someone will have a picture pop up, and I've given the people that love me permission to say Gabrielle's name, to tell stories, to send me pictures, because people don't always know what to do. They don't want to trigger you. It's like, trust me, you're not going to surprise me, right? Like, I know this has happened. And it's so, for me at least, and this is kind of what I was hearing from you, Amanda, like reaffirming that not only do I think about her every minute of every day, but a lot of people loved her and think about her and celebrate her. So, encourage the people that love you to do that as well.
And to add on, Michelle, I think to your point, it's not just say their name. I think a lot of times people say, I'm thinking of you. It's Mother's Day. It must be sad. How about like, I'm thinking of you. And I remember that time that Nick surprised you on Mother's Day and did that crazy stunt. And he did that stereo. Or I love the way that Eric used to just look at me and people could notice the way he was looking at me. Like to tell it's okay to tell the fun stories or the silly stories or the awkward stories, or, if you have the relationship with that person. So to bring their life to present, not just their loss. I think sometimes we just are bringing the loss to life on these days. And I really, even when I interview guests on my show, I'm always like, telling me about how they lived, not just how they died. Right. And Mother's Day is a day we can do that too for each other.
I want to, go ahead, Stephanie.
Oh, just one last idea too, is that when you are practicing your entitlement and you're practicing your treat yourself moment, one thing that I always do is I just give myself credit too for mothering myself 365 days a year, because that is a daily painful struggle, is having to, comfort myself anytime that anyone else would call their mom and ask for advice or try and get a baby gift or whatever it is, so that requires an immense amount of strength, and you should give yourself credit for it.
Absolutely. And I love that people are now writing, I love this, the names of There are people in the chat. It's so beautiful. Like I just added Nick's. Yeah, add your people. Add them up, guys. Before we open it up to questions, because we're almost there already, good God. I want to just ask each of you guys because this sort of dawned on me recently in my grief journey. And, it kind of took me by surprise, but it was kind of a nice revelation because then it helped me kind of go through a block and break through. Is how, you think grief is one thing or one emotion and how it can really start to take away other parts of your life. And for me, an example of this was I kind of recently figured out that like not having Nick around, not having my husband around, being, like Lisa said, the mom and the dad, because I'm not sharing that responsibility, I started to really feel like not feminine at all. Like I didn't know, I didn't feel sexy anymore. I didn't feel wanted. And dating in this city has been a disaster. So I felt very like just not feminine. And I realized, wow, grief has taken that away from me. Like this would not be my feeling if I still had my husband here.
Yeah.
And I had to like go find that. I had to go figure out how I could find being feminine again, find that in myself again. So I just wondered if we could share a little tidbit, each of you, about, or if nothing comes up, that's okay too, because I know I'm spawning this on you at the last minute, but was there anything like this for each of you that might help anyone listening be like, I didn't realize that grief took that from me, but it did. And I have to try to figure out how to heal that now on top of just the heavy emotion of grief. Anyone feel free to chime in.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, honestly, for me, that brought up two things. One, I didn't realize until I was deep into writing Grief is Love over a decade after I lost my mom, that I had anger toward her, this amazing, wonderful woman who was, by all accounts, a perfect mother. And the anger was just rooted in feeling abandoned. Obviously it's not her fault that she died. She had cancer, it was terrible. But I realized that, as a kid, and I'm sure Lisa can speak to this better than I can, it is actually a very normal response. And I've learned more through research that it's normal in a lot of contexts to have anger toward these people who we love and, wish we're still here, that's connected to abandonment. And it kind of blew my mind. And so, when Lisa says grief is a sneaky bitch, like it really is. And it shows up in all of these weird ways and all of these unexpected emotions. And then the other one for me, and I am constantly just in awe of Michelle in particular, just given all that she has been through and her steadfast, almost overwhelming commitment to hope. It's such a beautiful thing. But I realized after we adopted my son that I struggle to really believe in hope and to believe that things can just be good. When you have, in many of our cases, like multiple, like worst things that could ever happen, types of things happen to you, it's hard to maintain like a really open heart in a sense that life can be good, there doesn't always have to be bad that comes with the good things. And so those are some of the things that I frankly continue to struggle with.
Thank you. Yeah, Marisa. Both of you, but that brought up for me is a couple of things. One is, I think we don't name a lot the ways in which we lose identity. We're not just losing a person, but when we lose in relationships. So we lose, by the very nature of our loss, we lose a version of ourselves or an identity of ourselves. So I definitely have struggled over the years of grieving, femininity, because I have to sort of put on the masculine parts of me or different parts of us. So all of us lose parts of our identity. And the other thing, Amanda, to your question, I think a lot of us can think about is we are taught that grief is just sad, feeling sad. Like that's the story that we have culturally. And grief, we know it impacts us emotionally, physically, cognitively, relationally, and spiritually. Those are the 5 domains of grief. So for us to be able to have some grace and some self-compassion for ourselves, that we might in different places on our grief journey be tending to those different parts of us, then that sort of like what we can be doing. We don't have to do it all at once. We're going to just do that slowly. And when I started to expand the way and help people expand the way I think about grief, I think that's where I started to think about a little bit an internal hope. I am coming to you just having spent a year and a half in breast cancer treatment after being misdiagnosed, after my husband was misdiagnosed and then died from brain cancer. So you might think, like, how does this, like everybody on this panel, how does she have hope? And I think that's where I kind of work towards that, cultivating that practice, that's a muscle we really have to build, because so much of our lives have worked that other muscle, that things go wrong. So I've been thinking lately about the metaphor of really cultivating the practice of being a joy detective, or just leaning on internal hope. And that's a muscle. I mean, Amanda's our fitness guru here. She can relate to this, right? That's a muscle that we get to work if we want to help us grow. So that's what I'm thinking about as we think about this. Yeah.
Lisa, say those 5 domains of grief one more time
So it's emotional, physical, cognitive, relational, and spiritual.
Yeah, that is.
It's
Damn.
all of those things. And by the way, just the emotional, like Marisa was saying, it's sad. And maybe we say angry if it's a little bit for a little bit of time, but actually longing, homesickness, sorrow, resentment, regret. I mean, just in that one pillar, there's so much there. And so shifting what we give ourselves permission to acknowledge as grief is profoundly important as we move forward with our healing. That's a great place to start. Yeah.
You know, I'll say, looking at trauma, ironically, my first job was at America's Most Wanted doing missing children stories. And I've had a career in journalism where I was on the other side of the police tape before I was on the other side of the police tape. And I think one of the most powerful statements that you hear, and Lisa, you'll know this as a professional, is that 2 things can be true at once, right? That days after my daughter passed away, was murdered, not passed away, was murdered, I was in a daze, and I was still the same snarky chick I was before, and teased my sorority sisters that I wanted them all to wear red Jackie O pillbox hats to the funeral because they were fucking making a big deal about what they wore to the funeral. And I think holding on to those parts of yourself that are you and being okay with that can be true while you feel like parts of your identity have been ripped to shreds. I lost my daughter. I also, even though I was going through a divorce, lost my husband, lost my best friend, had to face him in a murder trial. So I think the ability to accept that I can have joy, I can have these glimpses of sun and light and joy, and at the same time, these other things can still be true, is a really, really important thing.
Yeah. Joy and hope and all of those things are a balm to our grief. They're not a replacement to our grief. They're not a substitution, and in fact, the more we can lean into that, the more we have the strength and the resilience to be with the hard parts of our grief when they come, because they will come without invitation. So we kind of have to buoy ourselves by, when we can, moving between kind of joy or ease and our grief. And that's what allows us to keep doing that and to not be sort of sunk. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of, for me, a lot of loss survivors talk about the before and after, the self before and the self after. And for my trauma with complex PTSD, there was not really a before, because my mom was always really abusive growing up. And so I think when I learned, when I was diagnosed a few years ago, that I had complex PTSD, there was so much grief around realizing that I didn't know how to be in the world. Like, that had always been a deep feeling of myself, that I didn't know how to be like everyone else. I just didn't know how to make friends or talk or resolve conflicts. And now that was sort of validated. And I think that grief comes up all the time now. If, I have a conflict with a friend, or I'm really awkward at a social situation or something like that, I'm just like, I guess I wasn't raised right, so I don't know how to behave in a, but I think, you know, again, I'm so lucky and blessed with my son, but when he's just a very joyful, confident, unafraid young guy. And I think I must not be that broken if I am the one that he's modeling, or, you know, he sees me all the time, and this is how I'm teaching you to be. I don't know. I must be all right. So yeah, that's where my joy is coming from.
Love it.
Love it. Ladies, I want to open this up to our chat room, because I feel like we have a lot of questions coming in. And I feel like we can answer them. So
I'm happy to help field some, Amanda.
yes, please do.
The first one that came in was from Shiomara. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And Shiomara, if you're still here and if you want to unmute and ask your question directly, I'm happy to do so. I'm going to take off these spotlights so we can just see everyone better, okay?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for this event. This has been so great and affirming. Tuesday, I after work impulsively went to the mall and got myself some Shake Shack, and I was like, let me watch a movie. It's still a matinee. And after that, I still didn't want to go home, and I impulsively bought a ticket to the Bad Bunny concert that was happening that night. And afterwards, I was like, why was I so impulsive today? And then I was like, oh, right, Mother's Day is coming up and I'm just escaping. So I really appreciate y'all sharing about the, just, I don't know, leaning into it, giving yourself what you need in the moment. And my question is about communicating this craziness to someone who, you know, hasn't had to experience this type of grief, communicating to my friends that I want to do this stuff, but I want to do it alone. Or to my boyfriend, it's like, I don't know what I need, but I know I need something and I'm still trying to figure it out. I just know that this is a heavy time for me, and it comes in waves. It comes whenever it comes. It's hard for me to understand, let alone to explain to someone else. So I guess I would like some advice on.
Get my group in the right spot.
I think you just did an amazing job
Thanks.
explaining it.
I agree. I was
Yeah.
literally thinking the exact same thing. What you said, I think is pretty perfect. And anyone who cares about you, they should be able to hear that and give you what you need, whether it's space or some more distractions, another concert, whatever it is. But I think you did an excellent job.
Agreed.
I think what you
Setting
did there was
boundaries are so important.
I think what you did that was so great is you stated your feelings and you were vulnerable instead of trying to brush it off or make excuses for your own feelings. And you were vulnerable enough to even say, I'm not sure what I need, which I think would open up the door for people to help you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you everyone for being here. This means a lot.
Thank you.
Next question, Lisa, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. So I kind of went into it in my thing here, just that I had a lot of losses that happened very close together in my life. I lost my dad to COVID in March of 21, and then I had my first son, my only child, in June of 22, and then I subsequently lost my mom 6 months later to cancer. But in a lot of ways, I feel like people think that, oh, well, but you have your child, so that must make it easier. It's almost like there's this thought that because there's something that brings you joy, then that kind of erases the grief. And I also say that in a lot of ways, it makes it harder too, because it feels like sometimes it's hard for me to stay present because I'm constantly thinking about who's not there and who I can't share it with. And I guess it's just, also jumping off of what Shamara was saying, like trying to get people maybe to understand that it's not something that just goes away, or that happy things don't just erase the sad. But I guess I'm just also curious about, trying to stay present in the good moments when you've dealt with so much, or that it brings up so much of the grief as well.
Again, I would just add, I mean, so much of what you all just said is that's how do you stay present to the good moments when you've had so many hard moments? That's also probably for a lot of us a muscle that we haven't practiced, and the hard moments get our attention because neurobiologically we need to pay attention to the hard things. So how do we practice staying present to the joyful moments when they come, even the little ones? Mindfulness is a great way to do that, to name it out loud, to say it out loud. I'm experiencing in my body that I feel ease or joy, to name that, I think is one way to do it. But I also wanted to add to Shamora and what you were saying, which is communicating vulnerably, as Stephanie said, and honestly, that maybe you don't exactly know what you need and that they can just be on alert. Remember, we talked about having your exit buddy, sort of to be on alert. I would also add, you don't owe everybody that vulnerable story or
Amen.
that explanation. So
Yep.
when we think about what do we need to communicate around a hard holiday, I always think, I wrote about this, I think about this, we can either educate somebody, tell them off, I mean, if you feel like it, or just ignore sort of their stupid thing they said, or their overture, or their ask to hang out. And that's really about you giving yourself permission to say, is there meaningful? Do they have the capacity? Have they shown me in the past that they can listen to what I need and accommodate or show up for me? Is there history there? Is there trust there? And so I would just add that not everybody's going to be your go-to person around that time, and you don't owe everybody sort of your vulnerability or your explanation. So sort of use a little bit of discernment, I would say. I would add.
The other thing I would just add on the piece around staying present, I don't know if this is helpful or not, or if my therapist friend will co-sign it or not. But for me personally, when my mom died, I had just turned 25. She had just turned 49. And I'm now in my 40s. So, in the decade that she didn't make it out of. And that I try, instead of letting that weigh heavily on me, like I try to use that awareness as motivation for being super present with my son. Because, we don't know, like we don't know how much time we're going to get together. And I think everyone on this call would agree, no matter how much time you get, it never feels like enough. And so I try to be mindful in that way. Like, like I'm so grateful to be in this joyful moment. That doesn't mean that you can't also feel like, oh, I wish my mom was here to see this. Like, I have that all the time, all day long. Totally normal. You are doing an amazing job.
Yeah. You can go back and forth. And as Michelle reminded us, sometimes it might be across days. Sometimes it might be minute by minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I always did with the holidays, just to tag on what everybody else was saying, you don't owe everybody your story. I often would just spend them by myself because I didn't want to have to be at somebody else's event and then explain everything. And so a simple I have plans is good enough. And you do have plans with yourself or with a masseuse or whatever it is. And also for the staying present thing, I think one thing that has been helpful for me is just to make this space to grieve and not be mad at myself for grieving, not being like, you shouldn't be grieving right now. And then I feel like that makes the grief last longer. So giving myself this space of like, whatever, I have an hour to just like listen to the sad songs and cry it all out and just feel it fully. I think on the other end, it's like after a good cry, sometimes you come out and you're more ready to sit down and be present with the people that you love or feel some joy, you know, after the release.
Thank you.
Barbara, you had a question. And Barbara, I'm so sorry to have read about your nightmares. Barbara, we can't hear you. Oops. Barbara, I'm so sorry, but the volume, I can't hear you, but I'm going to ask your question, okay? Barbara has been experiencing these nightmares, and she's saying she can't remember these nightmares, and her therapist is recommending trauma therapy. Can anyone speak to that type of approach?
I can speak as someone who has spent years in trauma therapy, and then I'll let Lisa be the doctor. You know, when I lost my daughter, my life experiences, both personally and professionally, I knew this was not just regular old grief, not to sound, you know, I had been to a bereavement counselor when I lost my mother. You know, this was law enforcement, this was court, this was a whole lot of other things. This was the morgue, right? This was a lot of other things. And, you know, I learned techniques like, and it can still happen, you know, where your brain, my therapist says nothing good happens after 10 p.m. So if you're laying in bed and you start to have those feelings, I would keep a rubber band on my hand to snap to kind of bring myself back, or pinch, or beat Bobby Flay, or get up and take a nice brisk walk around the block. But changing, just kind of shifting yourself out of that space, if it's waking up in it, just get yourself physically or emotionally out of that space where it's easy to just go down the wormhole.
I'm not a doctor, but I also want to defer to Stephanie, because I know I've heard you talk a lot about some of the wisdom that you've been working with Dr. Ham. If you want to speak, I don't mean to call you, but I just want to make space for your wisdom too.
I will say that I don't know that trauma therapy has really helped with my nightmares specifically, but it's helped with literally everything else in my life. And so I cannot recommend it enough. Yeah, I think that therapy has helped me in threefold ways. I think my healing can be summed up as first, sort of somatic, like learning how to calm my body when I'm in a triggered state, as you were talking about, Michelle, and sort of getting out of my head and into my body and realizing that I am not currently in danger. B, sort of processing what happened and allowing myself to feel real grief about it, allowing myself to feel like what happened to me was not right, and feeling all the anger and justification around that. And 3 is rupture repair therapy, just being able to communicate and trust others again after such a breach of trust from my own parents. And so learning how to ask for help, learning how to be able to apologize, take criticism, ask for what I need, and repair fights that I have, stay curious about what's going on with other people instead of constantly assuming that they hate me. And I think all of that has made me less hypervigilant all the time. And that hypervigilance does translate to less fear at night, being able to sleep better. Being able to sleep better might actually help nightmares, because when my sleep is most interrupted, that's when I have the most brutal nightmares. And so, yeah, cannot recommend it enough.
Yeah. I would add sort of ditto to everything that Michelle and Stephanie shared. I do think that for those of us who have some form of trauma, one way or the other, especially related to the loss, our bodies are in a constant hypervigilant state, which just means we're ready to fight or flight. You might have heard that, even when we don't know it, even if we're mentally thinking we're calm, it's normal day. But if our body is really dysregulated, then it can make falling asleep hard, staying asleep hard. We can go into our sleep with those fear thoughts. So I agree around creating kind of a, first of all, trauma therapy with a skilled trauma therapist, if you have any form of trauma in your past, or ensure is just useful, as Stephanie said, just writ large across dealing with, healing, your healing journey. But part of why it does that is helps you learn how to recognize the signs in your body that you're activated, even when you don't mentally think that you are. And then you can start to create some rituals or some behaviors that you do as you create your bedtime routine and have some consistency so that your body is not in that super high cortisol active state. And that can also help kind of reduce the frequency of those nightmares. But so I think all of those things are helpful, and just soothing your nervous system, anything you can do to sort of care for yourself. Another one I like, the butterfly tapping is another thing that you can do. This back and forth tapping, hands across your center, that gesture of care can help soothe and down regulate your body. I'm just saying words, but helps you soothe, helps you feel more at ease, right? In a way that might make coming into sleep easier. It's not a magic panacea to get rid of dreams, but those are all some things that you can do to help reduce the intensity, so that you can work with a therapist to sort of get at the root of what's going on. Yeah. Thanks, Barbara, for the question.
We have a question next from Holly. Would you like to unmute and ask?
Hi, humans. I'm Holly. Thank you guys so much for providing this space. It's been really lovely. So I kind of have like a twofold question. My first question is, do you have like specifics for plans when you're like encountering days like this? Like, I think when I hear plans, especially in a situation similar to this one, I'm always really curious about like what specifically is in that. I'm a CPTSD survivor as well, and I also have some betrayal trauma in my past. So some of the plans I've made are like super detailed. Who do you call when? What's alternative housing? Like that kind of crazy detailed. And then some that I have are like, well, like when I knew I was coming to this today, like made sure I had a mug that has texture so I could just be like messing with that and like wear comfy, cozy clothes, because that's nice when I have sad feelings. But yeah, if you guys have any like specifics that you share, I just find that really helpful in like building and trying to make plans more realistic. And then my second question is just more around like communicating, kind of honestly like what you had said earlier, Lisa, communicating to people about like not wanting to be at gatherings or events. And like my situation's a little weird. I celebrate holidays frequently with one of my primary abusers. So I'm in the process, I guess, of like figuring out what my boundaries are and what emancipation would, that's not the right word, but yeah, like separating, I guess, would look like. So if you have scripts or specific wording that you've used before, especially for somebody who like I'll likely be in a triggered state if I have to communicate them live, or if you have other strategies for communicating, that would be super helpful. So thank you, humans.
Thank you. I don't know if I can offer anything about the plans, except, Holly, to say that it sounds like you've already developed quite a skill set of having really specific detailed plans, knowing what works for you. Just the fact that you showed up today in a sweater and had the mug. And so I would really not underestimate the work you've already done to get to know what are the things that soothe you, what are the things that trigger you. So I think that's really helpful that you already know that. So I don't think I think it's important to start there and to sort of give yourself, like, pat yourself on the back, as it were. I think the only thing I would add is, especially for those of us who have trauma history and we have and feel hypervigilance, and having plans are important. I do not want to underestimate that. And this is hard for those of us who experience trauma. I have suffered a lot of trauma. I do not have a CPTSD diagnosis, so I can't say that piece. The degree to which you can find some flexibility, which is really hard. Rigidity is a sign of our trauma, right? For those of us who've experienced trauma. Having a plan is important, but somewhere in there, having flexibility in your plan, which maybe seems like ironic. That's where I kind of come back to that exit buddy thing. So like, I have a plan, but is there somebody I can sort of pull the ripcord with and say, like, that plan is not working, escape stage left, and let's try something new. It might be something to add in to think about that. Yeah, that's what I would add.
And I'll just say, from a planning standpoint, as much as I plan, there are days where I'm like, that's all going to hell. I'm not getting out of bed.
Yeah.
And so I think the most important thing is to be honest with yourself about where you are, or where I'll think I feel brave enough to go to church or brave enough to go to a lunch. And then I'm like, nope, not doing this. So for me, boundaries are about, looking myself in the mirror and saying, in this moment, what is best for me?
Yeah.
It's not about what I committed to. It's not about trying to look like Superwoman. It's not about, the cancellation fee on the spa. It's what in this moment do I need? Because when you've had so much taken away from you, that empowering, mothering yourself, creating a boundary around yourself is really, really important.
Yeah, I love that, Michelle. I also am gonna add, just for my plan, what I'm doing is I'm going to the beach because the beach makes me happy. It's my happy place. I love being out in nature. I love feeling my toes in the sand. I put Nick's ashes in the Pacific Ocean, some of them. So it makes me always kind of feel connected to him. It's very peaceful. Hopefully the sun will be shining. Elvis will be running around. And so that's where I'm going to start my day. And if that's the only thing that brings me joy that day, at least that's what my plan is. That's how I'm starting my day, with something I know that will make me happy, that brings me peace and makes me smile. That's just my little tidbit. You guys, I am so sorry. I have to go because I have to relieve my babysitter and grab my little son, but it has been an absolute pleasure moderating this panel of amazing women. And thank you to everybody here. And let's do this again. Thank
you, Amanda.
Thank you, Amanda.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
So yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, for a plan thing that both feeds my obsessive need to plan, but also works with the flexibility thing and is kind of fun, is making playlists. Playlists are a big part of it for me. And so I have my, I'm a survivor playlist. I have my lie down and cry playlist. I have my party playlist. I have my CPTSD specifically, I hate my mom playlist. And so, then depending on the mood, we can jam to whatever needs to be jammed to.
Love that.
I love that. Also, never underestimate the power of discharging. I love a playlist because moving your body, whether it's dancing sort of ragefully or swaying or whatever, is also a way to soothe your nervous system. Like a 2-minute dance party is always a prescription when I'm working with people. And mine usually is a Motown soul funk list. And usually it's 2 minutes, and that's what I'm jamming around to my house. But moving your body in any kind of way, unstructured like that, is also a way to kind of soothe you. So if you start to feel like my plan's going to hell and I don't know what to do next and I don't know what will feel good, grabbing a playlist and just moving your body or dancing it out for 2 minutes might get you back down so that you can take a look at your plan from a more calm state, and then make some new decisions about what might feel good and how you might want to change your plan. So it's like a good little trick to get back into regulation. Yeah.
There was a question from Lorraine, who I don't think is here anymore. I think she had to go. But I'm going to ask her question, and then I'm going to ask a final question for all of you. Lorraine says, I've had the experience, as I'm sure others have, that the grief of multiple losses and actually in a 4-year period, it gets harder with each year. Have others had this experience, and why is it that it gets harder?
I actually have not had that direct experience, but my both instinct and just from some of the research that went into grief is love, multiple losses, they compound each other. And the only time that I can really speak to having had this experience a bit myself is, in 2019, the thing that actually led to me finally starting to write my book, Grief is Love, was a pregnancy loss that forced me to finally fully reckon with how much I was still grieving the loss of my mom. And unfortunately, that reckoning happened at the start of the pandemic when we were all home and by ourselves and kind of in this moment of collective grief. And I think that, when we have to deal with multiple losses that happen close together, it's really important to get help in processing them. When I was working on Grief is Love and, trying to figure out how to deal with both lingering feelings of loss and grief that I felt connected to my mom, and then this totally separate, very different type of loss that I had of, this plan that we had for our future, this plan that we had for our family, like the physical consequences of the pregnancy loss, all of it. I needed a lot of help. And so I actually had multiple therapists who I was working with at the time, just helping me to the best of their ability and mine, like separate the losses a bit and, kind of figure out what I needed to deal with each of them separately, and then what I needed to deal with in the ways in which they were connected. And so I just want to acknowledge that it's a really hard thing. And I think having some professional help in dealing with multiple losses can be really useful. Lisa, anything?
Yeah, I mean, you said it beautifully. I think that's what they call in the field cumulative losses. And part of the reason we often encourage people to get help is when you think about the experience you have of one loss, you have this maybe a little more spaciousness to attend to it. And so you kind of experience and figure out how you feel about it and how it shifted or changed your life. But when you have multiple losses happening at once, you really don't have time to rebound. And so your grief all becomes sort of meshed together, and it's hard to sort of piece apart which pieces are you grieving? Are you grieving my role as a daughter? Am I grieving my role or the presence of a partner, et cetera? And so I love the idea that you shared that you went to multiple people. So whether it's multiple people or professionals, just helping somebody accompany you to kind of create some space so that you can kind of move. It's not like you're going to be like, okay, I'm grieving loss A, and then I'm going to be done, and then I'm going to grieve loss B or C, but giving some space for you to navigate back and forth between what is coming up for you around each loss is profound. And so not surprising, maybe a few years later, it feels harder than easier because maybe you just haven't had the support to make some space around each of those losses. Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa. And now, oh, Stephanie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think it's very easy to say to yourself, oh, it's been 4 years, or it's been 10 years, or it's been 15 years. And why is it not easier? Why is it harder? Or, and I think that is completely normal and natural. And one shouldn't judge themselves for feeling more grief as time goes on, or feeling like it gets harder at certain points. Because, as we go through different joyful events in our lives, that grief pops up because it's like, oh, you don't get to be here. You don't get to share this with me. I wish you were here to see me, you know, graduate from college. I wish you were here to see me give birth to my child. And so I think that it's only natural that there will be periods of intense re-grieving as time goes on. But in my experience, it does come in waves. It goes away for a while before it comes back again.
Stephanie, you mentioned the term regrief. I think that's so important. So when we hit new developmental milestones or major new places, we do go through something that's a regrief, a re-understanding, especially for kids who experience grief young. They go through that. And I think the other thing that you brought up, which I would say to Lorraine or to anybody who could relate to that, it feels harder years later than easier, is to ask yourself the honest, discerning question. Is it feel harder every day, all the time? Or am I experiencing a surge of it feeling hard? But I've also had some easier days, because we have to be careful of the stories we tell ourselves that it's just, and it might be, the answer really might be it's just hard all the time and there's never been any reprieve. So I'm not denying that. But for a lot of us, because we have the expectation that it shouldn't be so hard, then we tell the story like it just is as hard. So I really encourage all of us, when a wave comes or when regrief comes because of some new milestone or some new loss, when we experience new loss, it brings up old loss, is to ask ourselves with compassion a really discerning question. Does it feel as hard? Does the low feel as low as it did in the beginning? But do I still also have some mid places or some high places or some joyful places? And to just be a little discerning, because then the answer to that question will help you figure out what kind of help and support you need. Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa. And now a quick lightning round before we go to all of you. Lisa, Michelle, Marissa, and Stephanie. Some final thoughts. One piece of closing advice for those of us who are gathered to create space for grief on Mother's Day, and or to lean into legacy and to lean into joy.
I mean, my number one thing is always just give yourself permission to grieve. Like it's okay. Whatever comes up, whatever the feelings are, whenever they show up, like you are okay. You are not doing anything wrong. Give yourself permission to experience it.
I would give yourself permission to go do something that has nothing to do with Mother's Day. Go play, go take an art class or a dance class, or do something that's silly if you want, that has nothing to do with sharing the memory or telling the story or grieving or anything. If you want to try being experimental and find play, do that too. So like give yourself permission for that piece too, I would say.
I was just going to say that, you know, a situation, a loss isn't your whole story. And it's important to fight, to discover who you are in spite of, and to discover, you know, I remember this great line from the book Motherless Daughters when I read it 30 years ago. You know, I am who I am because my mother lived, and I am who I am because my mother died. But what I would add to that is, and I'm still changing and growing. So for me, the moments of joy are those affirmations that I'm still here, that I can still imagine a new future, that while some days are really, really bad, some days are okay, and some days are magical. And to allow the space for something different and more.
Yeah.
I would say allow yourself to have pride in yourself once again, for the self-mothering that you do, for the self-mothering that you're going to have to do this day. And then also, as long as you're not, you know, shitting on anybody's joy, you can allow yourself to have your quiet resentment at all of those people with moms or partners or whoever. Just be like, ugh, they're so annoying. And go ahead and feel that. It's fine.
Thank you all. I just also want to give a plug at this moment for our next holiday gathering, which will be in anticipation of Father's Day. We will gather for a conversation on June 12th with two grief catchers, Chaplain J.S. Park and Interfaith Minister Barbara Becker. Once again, Marisa Renee Lee, the amazing people connector.
Oh, Barbara
me.
Becker and J.S. Park, that's magic, those two. Yeah.
We try to hang out with good people.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. We're going to hold space for one another to remember, to honor, to wrestle with the legacy of our fathers and father figures. The discussion will touch on June Park's new book, As Long as You Need, and Barbara's recent memoir, Heartwood, The Art of Living with the End in Mind. And both of them will share their spiritual journeys. So I hope you can join us for that. Lisa, Michelle, Marissa, Stephanie, and in absentia, Amanda, please enjoy the beach on Sunday. Thank you all for this really beautiful, heartfelt conversation, for creating this space for us. And we hope to see you all soon. Take good care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
It's an honor.
Thank you.